All right, and we are recording. Well, good. Hi, Evelyn. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be doing a filmmaker spotlight with Evelyn Lorena, which, if you attended our film festival, her film was Gabriela. Very thought-provoking. We had a great time watching this film, and so today you're going to have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what this film, about the inspiration behind it, and of course, the person who created the character in the film. So, Evelyn, happy to have you on board.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and for screening our film and putting so much content out here in Georgia.
Absolutely, yeah. So we were really excited to learn about you. So just tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what got you into film?
Well, gosh, I don't even know how to answer that because it's like, it feels like it's been part of my life forever. But I guess I started with everything as an actor, and I'm still an actor, and I absolutely love performing and just that whole aspect of, the film industry. But as I started to go to castings and experience sort of the work part of that and the business part of that, I was really disappointed with sort of the level of nuance and the level of humanity that was kind of shown in the stories that I was being offered. And I just personally, I as like a person, I don't believe that humans have a lot of limitations, in the sense of, like, I think there's so much miraculous things that we can do, and also just emotionally the things that we go through. Everybody's so different and specific, and so it was really disappointing when I would be offered very particular things, and then on top of that, not only were they very stereotypical, it didn't carry a lot of complication, which I kind of looked for, and was what I admired in a lot of performers that I would view. So, over the last, several years, I just started writing things on my own, and different things and ideas would come to me. This one in particular came about throughout the pandemic, and we shot it just kind of like, I guess it would be still considered in the pandemic, because it was, at sort of at the end of it, but still with, all the protocols and lockdowns in place. But it was, it was sort of like a random sort of inspiration that came to me from not only, portions of my own life and my family life, but also looking at, it was like I think it was like a documentary short that they had on LA Times, and it was a story, an immigrant story, but it was done without judgment, without like an agenda, without just making it this sort of look at the trauma kind of thing. It was just very voyeuristic, and I just thought that was so beautiful and so great. And I was like, wouldn't it be great if we could do more stories like that, not just for immigrants, but anything, but in particular, I was drawn to the idea that it was immigrant based, because especially now, I think there's so much, I guess the right word is dehumanization of the topic, and not having a thorough understanding. And it feels so far removed. I feel like when you think of it, especially in the United States, like, immigrant, it's this other thing, and so I really wanted to tell a story that was very much like the American story, but also a human story. And anybody who watches this, I want to be able to say, I see myself in that, and I understand, and I get it. That was really important to me, the universal nature of it. And with any story, like, I think with filmmaking, me taking that leap was just trying to create and bridge a connection and make a connection with an audience. So it didn't necessarily have to be with performing. It was a new learning curve for me to become, to get behind the camera, but it was really rewarding, I think, as much as performing and understanding a new character.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so when you started getting into this, like the industry, right? Was this just out of just, like that's just something I'm interested in, or is it something that you always had a passion for?
Um, I mean, I guess it's both. Because I would say if you have a passion for it, you have the interest in it, right? But like um, I think it was just like a very intuitive thing, like even from the get-go. Like I'm always really intentional with whatever I do. So like if I decide to do something, I'm like, well, I start planning and I start doing all these things. So for me, it was like, okay, what's the next step for me? And I was really interested in training. And so I made all my plans and efforts to go to conservatory. And I think one of the values that I loved about training, because I know there's like the schools of thought of like, well, you don't need it. And the best thing is to just do it, whether it's filmmaking or acting or anything in the industry. And I actually think there is a lot of merit to that. Um, and I've had people ask me, do you think I should train? And I said, look, it's really what you want to do. And for me, it was really important that I get in sort of almost like a laboratory setting where I could break things apart in a safe way. And since I had come from a family that really didn't have any point of reference for this stuff, I feel like I needed a little bit of like, ushering in and guidance and just a place that I could, feel safe to just explore. And that's what I felt conservatory really brought for me. In addition to giving me all these tools and things like that, and the same tools that I feel like translated into filmmaking, because a lot of times we compartmentalize. They're like, you're a cinematographer, you're an actor, but at the end of the day, I think artistry is artistry, and you know, you're always trying to communicate something. The only thing is just the materials are different. You know what I mean? But it's always, I feel like, at least in my experience of like now having done so many different hats, that it's just the mode that changes, but the story is always, at the center of it. The empathy, the understanding, the psychology, all of that is still part of each one of those roles, whether you're director, actor, writer, whatever. So I feel like that was really important to me, from a young age, just to have like a safe space like that. So whatever that means for someone, I feel like that they should, pursue that.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, that's how I got it. But for me, it was like an intuitive thing. Like I would watch films so much and I just felt like it was what my heart was steering me to, and what I understood as like part of my life. It was just like an intuitive thing. And um, I let my parents know that's what I wanted to do, and they were slightly disappointed. But we moved through it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your film. So Gabriela obviously brought a special insight to the screen with regard to the Guatemalan culture.
Mhm.
And so personally for me, right, like I personally like reflected to this not only because like I'm a Guatemalan adoptee, but also because like even though like I sense like the artifact, the presence of like having the culture in there, and like you don't see this on screen. Like it's so rare to find this, right?
Yeah.
Especially in this nuance that you mentioned. Can you
Mhm.
share a little bit about what inspired you to include this in the film?
I just wanted something real, and like I said, like I had said at the top of the conversation, is that like, just something that um felt that would connect, and that wouldn't just be like a caricature or this projection of what people think, an immigrant is, or this. And I hate to make it like, sound a bit political, because that's not my intention, but it's this idea that I think a lot of stories that, unfortunately, if they're not Caucasian,
Mhm.
that there's more, the stories end up becoming the idea or the tokenizing of the thing rather than just letting it exist. And that was what was really important to me, is that people just exist. I don't think that you know, a Guatemalan or a Mexican or a Vietnamese person walks around with like, I'm a, you know, they're just themselves. Like they're not just like, I'm this thing that you think I am. You know, it's like almost like I said, it's like dehumanizing in some way, right? It takes away the parts of their own humanity that they have. And it also limits, I think, like the idea of like stereotypes, like really limits where a person can go, because then you've already relegated them to what they are. And so they can't move in the society, which is such an American thing. Like that's the beautiful thing about America, is that you move through all these different forms, you know, like my parents, who they were when they came here, like even financially, is very different than who they are now. And that's because they've been able to move through that. But that hasn't necessarily been seen, like you said, in the media. Like it's the media, it becomes like very specific. And I think even when I, you know, started out, a friend of mine and I, we had done this like podcast that interviewed us about a role that we had played in, and the interviewer at the time was even, and this was like a, you know, a few years ago, and he commented, well, I'm having trouble with seeing you guys in these roles. And we asked why. And he said, well, because there's no cultural specificity. And we were so shocked by that, because it was like, oh, so we're just supposed to be what you think we are, right? This was like a white, you know, middle-aged guy. And it's not like I was super offended or anything, but it's this idea that like, you just have to kind of, I wanted to create a story that allowed, no matter what you were doing. And I think that's part of the reason that I think there was a little bit of a downtrodden aspect to her character, because I wanted it to be the most unexpected thing and still have humanity. Because it's easy to say, you know, oh, an upper middle class person, they have humanity, because the way that a lot of stories are tailored, you know what I mean? But I wanted it to bring just humanity. It doesn't matter what socioeconomic class, what ethnicity, what background you are, like all of that was just really important for me to like show it as like part of the character, but not what defined the character. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. And so throughout the film, like, right, we'll see Gabriela, you know, she's discovering herself, her path. And,
Yeah.
you know, like, you know, every day, you know, I think every one of us can relate to that, right? We're all trying to figure out who we are as a person and where we kind of fit into these social norms of society. Because, you
Yeah.
know, it's like we have social media and you know, that technology that says that we have to fit in into what they say we do. And it's just, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, it takes
Yeah.
a
Yeah. And I think that that's something that I've really appreciated over the last, like, I don't know, I guess like 5 years, is that everyone's kind of willing to break those boundaries. And I think that's why maybe this story also came at the right time, because, you know, I think if I tried to make it, you know, maybe even 5 years ago, it would not have been the same thing, you know, because like I said, like even having that conversation on that previous podcast to now, what a different sentiment. Like I couldn't even imagine someone kind of saying that still a little bit in the same way, you know,
right.
um, in terms of representation, I mean, but in terms of the story, yeah, absolutely. I thought it was just so important to show Guatemalanness, how it was for this character, and it's so different. Like there's so many ways that that can be portrayed. Like I wouldn't want to insinuate that this is like the only way a Guatemalan is, you know, supposed to be or something. It's just more that this is a very specific thing, but there's also room for so much more. And I guess, again, to repeat what I just said, is like, it doesn't matter, you know, where you are in the social, you know, hierarchy, you have humanity, and there's a vastness to each person, you know?
Right, absolutely. So with regards to like the theme and the story arc,
Mhm.
what, if any, are some of the themes that you hope for the audience to discover?
The themes you said?
Yes.
I think the biggest one for me was this idea of like transcendence through self-acceptance. Like the idea of just self-acceptance is so big. And I think that's what I wanted to make universal about it, because we move through so many spaces. Excuse me. We move through so many spaces where we don't feel like we fit in, or like you just said, that social media pushes, pressure on us to be somebody else. Or I think the proverbial coming of age journey is always, well, not always, but part of it can be, especially in modern times, this idea that if you're something else, you'll be better, right? So like this, I mean, it's how they market, like even most things like beauty products, healthcare, everything. If you have this thing, you'll be better. And I think it was even translated to, Gabriela, where she's like, if you have this country club, you'll be better. If you're this, you're going to be what you want. You'll achieve the American dream. And it was this like, and it's so pervasive. And so I wanted her to find value within herself, not just as Gabriela, but also in her indigenous heritage, in her Guatemalanness, in her family, in all of that, and finding, this sort of visceral understanding and acceptance and, I guess, confidence in that, because once you have that confidence, you can achieve what you want to do. And she can, she can find a way to be a swimmer or whatever she wants. But I think it was more about her not hating herself and bringing herself down on things that are actually probably helpful to her and a real source of strength for her, even if she hasn't seen it yet. Which I think is like what we're all discovering. It's like, I went through a lot of that, and, just coming out of it actually for myself. I think it's like a lifelong journey, but which is what I try to also communicate in the film. It's why it kind of just ends. It's not like very decisive in the ending. It's more like open-ended, and sort of the beginning of a journey, because that's how I feel. Like, I spent so much time feeling less than, either at my own hand or at the world's hand. And I think part of me just started to realize that, like, there's so much confidence and greatness in what you do have. You spend so much time trying to change that instead of just embrace it, and it ends up being the gift that you offer to the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you touched a little bit about how she, her outlet was like swimming, right? And so swimming often symbolizes like freedom, escape, because when you're swimming, right, you're floating, you're free, and it's just this sense of that you can be isolated but also be in a communal environment at the same time. So this physical art form, it's different from what we see from other films. How does this art form per se, let's go with that, thematically kind of shape Gabriela's story? How does she use this outlet?
Well, you're totally right about this idea of like feeling both like a suspense and freedom. I think that suspense is more like peace, but like you said, it's also like limitless, because you can do so much in the water, and the water moves with such force and it's this really interesting dichotomy. I think for me, it was just, I think bringing the water in was such a intuitive thing. Like at the time, I wasn't sure what I wanted to use, and I just intuitively was like, it has got to be something with water. And I just explored that, and it ended up being the right choice, I think, for the film. And it was also something that I think would link sort of the Mayan elements a little bit, you know what I mean? And I wasn't sure whether I wanted to really almost tokenize that, with like headdresses and things like that. But I felt, again, to bring it back to sort of a more grounded place and an everyday, slice of life kind of thing. I wanted it to just feel what it would feel for her. And for her, I think it was just the plainness of the water itself, the purity of it, so that we, my team and I decided that adding anything to that would not be wise, I guess, for those reasons. And so the water itself is just like this really pure um, place, like almost primordial, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's different layers of the water too, because there's like the natural water, which is very, I think that's the one that kind of connects her to this, I guess, for lack of a better word, idea of God or some sort of spirituality for herself in the water, in the oceanic water. But then there's the chlorine water, which I like to call the fake water, because it's the water that's the one that she's seeking in the beginning, but it's full of chlorine. It's kind of got this like fakeness. It's not, real water, I guess, in that way. So, yeah.
Huh. That's very interesting. That's really, I didn't even think about that until just
Oh,
now.
yeah.
That's crazy. That's,
Yeah,
I love that.
there's
So
layers, and then also like, in the shower of like washing out and trying to have like the privacy, like that. I tried to bring like different versions of the water for the different layers of the journey, if that makes sense.
right. Yeah. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Wow. I love that insight. So some of the water scenes, did y'all have a studio that you did that, or how did you?
Yeah, I don't know how we did this. Like, I was like, this is a miracle. Like, it's a miracle because, so for a short, your budget, I mean, the most, I think, because I think, like, for example, like Lena Waithe's company for Indeed, I think they get like 100,000, right, for like a short. And like we got under that, obviously. But if you're going to use a sound stage, you're talking about not, and plus VFX, not less than like 500,000, right? Like this is something that is very expensive. And we were so fortunate that Screen Gems really believed in our story. We were able to pitch the story to the studio, and they were really willing to work with us in kind, and create the environment for that. And we're just really grateful, because otherwise I don't think we would have been able to do it. So yeah, we used the sound stage and stunt coordinators and lots of like pulleys and harnesses and all kinds of stuff. And it was interesting because I don't even know how I came up with the idea for that, because I think originally we were thinking about using a pool and just shooting it like that, but that is very complicated, and not just like for health and risk wise, but also just technically it's so difficult, and the things that you have to do, and you have to get special casings for the camera, and it's just very expensive. And so um I have a very do it yourself attitude for everything. So I don't have any sort of reference for this stuff. And I just told my producer, I said, well, I know some, engineering and stuff. And, my dad would always hook up these pulleys, and you could drag um, these things across. And he said, oh, that might be interesting. And I pitched that to the stunt coordinator. He goes, oh yeah, that's how we'll do it. That's how we'll do it. And I know exactly what to use and get. And I was like, that's wild. And that's what we used. And so that's how they moved me across, and I flew across, and we got these like really big industrial fans. I think actually, like I said, I don't have any technical expertise in this stuff, but then I was watching Shape of Water, and I guess they used a similar sort of setup. So I thought that was really cool, because I really loved what they were able to accomplish in that movie. Through the FX and the sound staging for Dry for Wet. So I guess we kind of, in the end, modeled it kind of close to that. And I thought it came out really nice for low budget. And I mean, relatively low budget, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, this type of indie film, it just makes it so special, because, it's what you're able to do. You're able to do so much more with less, right? And
Yeah.
and it becomes beautiful at the end of it.
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
I do want to talk a little bit about some industry trends.
Yeah.
So, right, this film adds a lot of nuance, right? We talked about, the authentic storytelling in a way that shows, like, what it's like to be in the role of an immigrant, right? Because in for example, it's like you're feeling you're stuck between two different worlds, right? You're like, we talked about society, that you have to fit this way, but in another form, you're having to live in the way that you are, right? So, what has your experience been like in bringing this authenticity to the screen?
Um, yeah, I mean, you're totally right about feeling like you're in between two worlds, and that's another thing that I think people have said to me that makes it relatable. I know it makes it relatable to myself, and that was really important to me to infuse the story with that, because that is directly from, I think, my experience. I mean, not exactly, obviously, the story evolved a lot from my own personal life and everything. And it's not just my personal life, it's a mixture of so many things. But I thought it was really important that that journey of, like you said, the two worlds is an important thing. And I think it's what, regardless if you're Guatemalan or not, what you end up feeling a lot of times, as an immigrant in the United States, because things get so polarized and you feel like, you're kind of torn as to what your identities are. And especially like growing up, you want something solid where you can say, this is who I am. I think later on you realize like none of that kind of matters, but like, it's very important, I think, for someone like her, to figure out. And then, at the end of the story, she also begins to figure that real truth out, which is, oh, it doesn't really matter, but I feel like in terms of like the greater whole and bringing that to life, I guess it's, just about really infusing the emotional truth of it, right? Like I would hate for someone, like I said, to look at the story and say, "Oh, that's how all Guatemalans feel," because I don't know how all Guatemalan Americans feel or how all immigrants feel. But this story in particular, um, like I said, is fueled by my emotional journey, my parents' emotional journey, other people's emotional journeys, and a sense of like everyone's journey, right? Of like universal kind of coming of age. And so I think for me, it was just bringing that emotional truth, or at least this part of it, to the story, and hoping that it resonated. You know what I mean? And if it didn't, well, it didn't, but I'm very happy that we've had good response with that. And um, yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, kind of moving forward with that, like, have you seen, since you created a film, and now that it's within its has it ended its festival run? Is it
It's
finished,
still
or?
going. I think if I'm not mistaken, we have some stuff through June of this year, and then, I think that'll be probably I mean, it's hard to say because sometimes you get sort of festival invites throughout the year,
Sure.
um, depending on, what it is. And so, that may change, but for now, yeah, that's kind of, and we got ours cut a little bit short, I think, um because we had qualified for the award season. We had to make a choice as to whether to keep going, um, or accept the qualification. And if you accept the qualification, then you you know,
Right.
kind of have to keep moving forward. And so we chose to go with that because it was just the right time. And yeah, but it also just depends, I think, festival wise, like what the parameters of each festival is, because some festivals will take, shorts over, they're like, oh, it's a lot if it was made in the last 5 years, if it was made in the last 2 years, if it was made in
Mm.
the last year. So I mean, we unfortunately, like, there was one recently that we were really looking forward to, and we didn't realize that we had just missed sort of the cutoff, and they had to let us know we were, disqualified because we
Oh,
were,
no.
yeah, it was like by a month or something. And so it was just kind of like, what a bummer. And it was like such a great festival, you know, and they were super apologetic, but it was nothing we could do about it. I mean, those are the rules, you know? So it's
Yeah.
one of those things where like, I kind of, you know, it'd be nice if I was just like, we're going to be on the festival circuit and this is what happens. But as you know, it's like selection process. There's rules and regulations for certain things. And it just becomes a thing of navigating that.
Yeah, absolutely. So since the ending, right? So since we're coming to an end of the festival circuit, have you
Yeah.
seen more of a trend toward mixed genre narratives, similar to like the nuance that you've had?
Yeah, I would say so. And that's, I think I had just mentioned like what you had asked a couple questions ago is that it's one of the things that I really love right now in all the artistic industries or mediums, that people are willing to just create things with different inspirations from all over. You know what I mean? And I guess the genre-less sort of thing, you know? I would say that this one probably falls in a drama genre, like Gabriela itself, but I tried to also have that spirit of like pulling from all kinds of things. You know, I wanted it to feel a little bit art house. I wanted it to feel a little bit, you know, thrilling. I wanted it to feel a little bit romantic. You know, I wanted all these things, not haphazardly, you know, without intention, but because it was also revealing of her world, you know, and it was important to show not only in sort of like the theme of it, but also because that's her complication that shows that she's a complicated character too, you know. So it's a complicated story like we all are. And so yeah, and so I feel like it's been really cool to see stories and, you know, music and writing that is complicated like that. And I mean, like I said, genre is always supposed to just serve the story. You know, I think a lot of people uh, I've seen, you know, will get caught in this trap of like, oh, but I want to do this like horror thing, or I want to do a thriller, or I want to do a romance, or that, or whatever, right?
Right.
And I mean, for me, I always ask, like, is it the best way to serve the story that you're telling, regardless of like the tone of it or how you're going to shoot it? Like, what's the story? And I think everybody, when they're making something, should always have that at the core. You know what I mean? Because then you never know if it changes. And I say this because with Gabriela, it changed. Like it originally, it started it started, I started it as like she was this like kind of almost punky character, and it was kind of having like an Adventureland theme tone to it. And I'm serious. And she was actually a basketball player instead of a swimmer, even though the water stuff was still, it was weird. And you know, she would like listen to, I don't know, Husker Du, and it was just like a really weird kind of thing. But when I was like, well, what is, you know, when it wasn't working, and it was because I was trying to fit it into this box, you know, and it's like, it doesn't work. You have to find out who the person is. And I think that's what helped find this, whatever the story ended up being, you know. Like I said, I don't want to limit it now, besides calling it a drama, you know, but it definitely went through that journey. Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So how long did the script writing process take you? Like how, like from the moment you concepted the idea of this is what the
Mhm.
character or the story should be to the moment that it started from the first day of filming?
Um, well, like I said, the original idea, it came to me just out of school. And so it kind of just percolated. It was something that I would think about probably, I don't know, every other day in some form, you know, just because it was in my mind. And then when the pandemic came, um, I was like, I need to flesh this out. And Morris and I kind of co-wrote like a feature version of it. And it just didn't work, like I said just now. And it didn't work. And I said to him, I said, you know what? We're all locked in here. Let's let me get some time and figure out what I want to do with this. And I ended up thinking one of the things that I really love and value about shorts, and it's why I encourage, like, some of my friends, for example, who are performers, are like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, make a short, because the short form, I mean, I think that there's a reason that it gets its own section at the Oscars, for example, because you really have to understand how to distill a story as a short and how to understand what your story is as a short. As much as, like, it's so difficult, obviously, to make a feature film, right? But the feature film, I think, when I see a film, you have the cushion of, like, being able to add a scene. In a short, obviously they limited at 40 minutes, but let's just say that, like, the average short is not more than 15 minutes, for example. And you have to be able to distill it. You can't add scenes, you know what I mean? Because there's no room, there's no time. Otherwise, you're going to make a feature, right? So I feel like it's really important to use the short form to figure out your story, which is what we did with Gabriela. I during the pandemic was really distilling it into the short form. And then when I felt I had something, the Netflix fellowship came along. I used that version of the short, and then the rest was history. The mentors through that program, we changed certain things, and then even in the editing process, that was a whole, like, it was like almost like rewriting the script there, because there was certain things that did not work in the original rough cut that we screened in Los Angeles, and so we had to readjust all of that. So yeah, I think it's always a process, even after the film is done, when you're, like, kind of rewriting it in your head. But, like, that was sort of the process for that. Like, you would think that the short comes first and then the feature, but it was actually opposite for us. It was the feature came first, and then we cut it down, and we were like, this is better served as a short. And I feel more satisfied for some reason with the short than I do with the idea of making a feature of it. I'm not opposed to doing that in the future, but for me, it was, that was it. I feel like that was what got it,
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that narrative that you said, it's like you started with the future and you broke down to the short, right? I think as you were talking, I was thinking a little bit like, it's kind of like music, right?
Mm.
It's like if you listen to, whether it be like, original soundtracks or, favorite artists of yours, right? It's that you're dancing around the idea that anytime that you listen to it, you have this sense of feeling and you have a story,
Mhm.
I'm taking, for example, like an original score. We'll take something for like Jurassic Park. Like sometimes it's
Love
sentimental.
dress.
Sometimes it's like, it's there. You can sense the action, but like if no one had seen the movie, and you start listening to the music, you have this idea of a concept of you're building your own story based off what's going on in the sound. So it's kind of that same thing that you're taking from a feature. You had all these ideas and concepts. It's like, well, maybe not. Maybe it needs to be a little something a little bit more, center down. But no,
Yeah, and I was gonna say, it goes back to the idea of what you were asking about genre, and it's like, I didn't set out to make, a genreless thing. It was just that it served the story better. And it's the same thing with the short. The short served this story better than making it a feature at this time. Like I said, that may change later.
sure.
I may, something may click with me where I'm like, you know what? If we take it in this direction, then we can use it as a feat. You know what I mean? Then that's cool. But like I said, at this time, it feels like that was what captured what we needed to say.
Yeah, well, I think we can both agree. I would like to be the first of mine to see the feature whenever that does come out. So please let us know.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard writing. And I take it very seriously and it could just be because I come from the theater world where the writer is it. Like when you're reading a play, like the writer is the right, you know what I mean? Like they know what they're bringing to the play. And so we, at least in the training or at least in working with other theater artists, you learn to respect the writer so much. And that's not to say that like, you know, people who are in the film industry don't. It's just such a thing that's so much more obvious, I think, to me sometimes than it is. Because like with movies, the thing that's obvious is the production value when you're seeing it. Like a lot of people aren't thinking about, you know, the writing and things like that in a more obvious way. Because you know, you're watching the commercials for the film and this and that. So it's very different than when you're in the theater. The theater is you've just got the words and the audience, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think that really instilled like a sense of importance for me. And what I try to do with my colleagues and myself is to translate that to film too, because it's so important that we value that. It's one of the things that I loved about the writer's strike, as awful as that, you know, that was for people to be fighting for their livelihood like that. But like, I appreciated that they were, because without the writing and without focusing on that and really making that the art, like the basic art form, it's kind of the way that I think about it too, is like it's like a house. If you don't have a good foundation for the house, there's no way it's going to withstand anything, you know.
Mhm.
And so it's the same thing I think with when you're creating this stuff. A lot of people want to cut corners on the writing or this, or you know, even with the bigger films where it's like, well, you only have a couple weeks to do that. How do you It took so much effort to just make a short. Like I can't imagine pumping out like these writer for hire things. Because
Yeah.
I've been asked like, oh, do you want to be a part of this writer's room of this and that? And I've ended up having to like not do it, because part of me feels like I don't know if I could do it. You know, it takes me, you know, and that's just knowing my process. Like it takes me a little bit of time and a lot of like crafting to do. And somebody said you know, it gets easier, but I don't know if I want it to get easier, if that makes sense, in that part of the writing. Do you know what I mean? Because that's the most important part. Like it's different like when you're auditioning, you know, as an actor and you're like, oh, it'll get easier, the auditioning process. That's fine, because you know, it's a practice sort of thing. But with the writing stuff, I'm always like, do I want that to get easy? Because then am I I mean, I don't know. It could just be because I'm just sort of starting in that area, but I don't know. I feel really strongly about the writing being very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree because, like you said, like I like how you talked about it being similar to like that of a foundation of a house, right? Because like and I think about we have our film festival too. From a film
Mhm.
festival perspective, right? If the writers don't, if there's no story, there's no film. With no film, there would be no film festival. So
Yeah.
it's like the writers. I have so much appreciation for the writers because again, they are the ones that are really bringing this life, to the character, to the story, to everything that that it becomes in the end. So just so much respect for that.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like I'm talking ill of things, but I'll give you an example. So I read the Breaking Bad pilot and
Hmm.
also some scripts from like the 80s, just like regular scripts, you know, like even like I don't know, like 16 Candles, Lethal Weapon, anything, you know, I would just pick up anything. And I was astounded. And I don't know if this is like an entertainment trend or if it's like, it was just not a good script. I don't know. But like, I would read like some modern day action scripts, and I'm not going to name which ones, but like some modern day action scripts in comparison to those kind of classics. Um, and I was shocked at like the difference in quality.
Hmm.
Like like I said, I don't know if it's just because like if it's an entertainment trend where now they're like, oh, just keep it as bare as possible, because those other scripts were like reading poetry. And it's not like, you know, it's like um I don't know, whatever Lethal Weapon or 16 Candles is like this thing, you know, it's they were just like kind of like the films of the time and everything, but they were still written so well. Like I was so floored by that, you know, and then reading some, like I said, modern day stuff, and you're just like, this is so different, you know. And like I said, I don't know if that's like industry trend where it's like just the way that things are presented has changed, but I was just kind of thinking to myself, like, wow, it's so important to have good I mean, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's also an interesting perspective because it's, you also think about like, what was happening during that time, when
Yeah.
we were writing it, like,
Yeah.
were there wars or what was going on?
Yeah. Or is it like, did they just get more time? Because like, that's
Right.
the other thing that I worry about. And it's sort of the commercialization of these things, which is like, that's another reason that it's like this weird space, like what you were talking about when you were asking about trends, is like, I feel like there's two pathways. There's like the people that are breaking the boundaries and you're allowed to do it and you break free and you've got this like thing that people are like really responding to. And on the other end, there's like the commercialized version of like all this stuff, which is like, well, tell me what your brand is and you got to stick to the brand and we got to find the thing. And there's the tokenization and like, it's almost like the backwards of it.
Mhm.
So it's kind of this weird thing where it's like, where do we kind of fall in that? And like, obviously I want to go on this side, right?
Right.
Versus that side. But it ends up being where, you know, a lot of the average content does fall on that because they just need to find an audience, they need to make the money, and that's it. And the process, the artistic process of like writing that stuff, I think, at least this is what I hear from like colleagues and being in those spaces, is that like they everything is so rushed. You know what I mean? Which is what I worry about, is just the rushing of these things, because you just can't. I feel like I don't know how I mean, obviously, like I said, like with practice comes more like ease with these things, but it's like there's a difference, I think, between like having ease at something and also just rushing something.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and
So,
that's what I worry about, is the rushing of all that stuff, which I think, a studio like Marvel, I think, is learning a lot from that, because they put out a whole thing where they were like, we're not going to just pump out content anymore. We're going to focus on, one movie a year kind of thing. And I'm like, great. Because they were like, I was shocked. I'm like, how are you doing all this? Like, I just
right.
don't, and yeah, anyway.
Yeah, yeah. It really is interesting to watch those industry trends, and yeah, I like that perspective against Marvel. It's like, they went with one story. I think they took away one of the villains that they were going to use for like the next Avengers movie, but then it's like they're like, wait a second, I think maybe we need to revisit this, because again, it's not working, right? They notice it because it's just based off their attention of who's going to the theaters and who's not. So
Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah,
it's like, that's not where the art is. The art is not, I hate to say that like, I think Rick Rubin talks about it. Um, but the audience is important, like at the end. The audience should not matter in the process, because if you're doing something to be liked, then that's why you're doing it. You're not doing the thing itself. And so like, I think that that's what ends up happening with a lot of, you know, content, I guess, recently or whatever, is that there's a sense of like the demographic versus like the story. And I
yeah,
always, like, we've just spent this whole conversation talking about, like, to me, the story is the most important. So anyway.
absolutely. So I do want to get into lessons learned
Oh
before we
yeah, sure.
just a little bit. So can you tell us about any lessons learned that you might have figured out either during the script writing process, the filmmaking process? Is there anything that you wish you knew then, what you know now?
Um, get an assistant. No, I mean, we ended up getting, an assistant, but I would have liked that, I think, from the beginning versus like the end. And then I think the other lesson is, um, I think the biggest portion of this film has actually been the posting of it. I think a lot of filmmakers will, or at least, from commiserating with everybody, is that you'll focus a lot on the production and the pre-production and the story, which is, again, we just spent the whole hour talking about how important that is. But you forget then to focus on the second part of it, which is the reception of the actual film. Like, and that includes like marketing, that includes like festival strategy, that includes like where you want it to go, that includes like, you know, post-marketing materials, like who do you want this to, like, how do we get the sales agent on board? Like all that sort of business stuff, I think has been more effort and cost more than a lot of some of the production stuff, you know? So I feel like that's really important to like have those kinds of plans in place and like PR and all these things so that you have support with that, because that was the hardest sort of learning curve for me, is like, whoa, now what do we do? You know, because you make the thing, but if you don't have an audience or you don't have people watching it, what's the point, you know?
Right.
So, I mean, I guess it depends on what you want. Like some people don't want, they just want to make it. That's fine. But we didn't want that. We put so much effort into it that we wanted people to see it. And so I think just looking back, it would have been nice if I had more planning on that the year before. But I think we still did, like, you know, we did a good job, I think, and for having it, you know, been a first go around like that. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so you also had an actress with you, Maria Talon, I believe.
oh yeah, I love.
Did you learn anything from her while you guys were
Yeah,
acting?
of course. Presence. She's one of the most present women, and I think it really, I understood gravitas more through her because of that presence. Like when you're present, you just are able to pull more. And it reminded me that I've been trying to work on for the next 6 months to try and get into a play, because she comes from like the Mayan theater and like in Guatemala, and that's her training and what she does. And so I was really inspired by that, and just like kind of rekindling that love um of being able to just like have that present. And I feel like the best way to do that is in the theater. Like it's just, you know, it's hard sometimes with like film stuff, because you know you've got all this going on, then you got to cut, and then you got to hold, and you got to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
With like the theater, you are there and you're cultivating something. And so I really respected her for that, and seeing that like in real time viscerally again, and talking to her about it too. Like she's really such an open vessel, so loving. Just really, you can ask her anything, open book. And I was just so grateful that she was part of it. I I I don't know. I just feel like she's always with me too. It's really, we had like a really strange, like Maris, the producer, can talk about, we had such a strange like spiritual connection and like chemistry. And I don't know if that just comes from our backgrounds or what, but it was very, very miraculous and beautiful. And I love it.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought it was a wonderful performance. I mean, to see both of y'all standing next to each other, I mean, I just can't imagine how you guys felt like in the moment, you know, even
It was
portraying.
moving. Like, I mean, like, you know, the beach stuff was like, it felt really real for both of us. And we talked about that a lot, like at the end when we were wrapped and everything. And she, you know, she would say like, I felt like I was talking to my child, and I felt like I was talking, it was just, because she also kind of looks like my mother. Um, and so it was just all very, like I said, it was like a spiritual experience. And that beach scene really, I think, I mean, I hope we captured it, but it, on the day, it really felt like something, like it was, whoa.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone in the audience definitely felt that, you know, they're
Oh,
in that final scene that you could just, you could sense it, you know,
yeah.
it means so
I'm so
much. So,
happy with that. Yeah. And it's interesting because like I've seen the film so many times at different festivals, right? And every time I'm like, oh, it's the film, you know, and I don't mean that like in a bad way. I just mean
right,
I've seen it so many times, right? But I saw it at Regard in Canada. And I don't know if it was like the programming, like the film that came before it, or the themes of the films, because all the films kind of had similar themes. But when they played ours, And at the end, I was like, whoa, like, and and I'm not saying it like, oh, I'm like tooting my own horn. I just mean like what you just described, where like, you know, there was like this gravitas by the end of the beach scene that like I hadn't noticed before. And for some reason at that festival in particular, I did notice it, and I was just shocked at myself, where I was just like, where did we even come up with this? But like, it was, yeah, it had like a weird spiritual transfer. I don't know. It was just like like I said, it could have just been the other films too, because the other films had similar themes, but it was just very apparent to me at that festival. So yeah,
I love
it's a
that.
lot.
Spooky.
I was like, whoa.
Yeah. So before we
Anyway.
hop off, one last thing. So your film was obviously nominated recently as Oscar qualifying. Is there anything that our community can do, or anyone who's watching this, that can support you as for your film? That I believe it's nominated as the best live action short film. Is that correct?
So it was one of the films that qualified. So the nominations are already out. We didn't unfortunately make the final cut, but basically what happens is over the course of the year, certain films will qualify. And I think it was 170 or 180 films that qualified.
Oh,
And then through that, they cut it down to like 20 films or so for the short list. And then from that, they cut it down to the final nominations. So we did most of our campaigning through the fall. So we did it from September, October, November, December. So that was kind of the prime time for us in terms of like getting any shortlist action. But that's okay. Like we're just happy that we were part of that select group. Like that was big. That was huge for us. And the 5 films that were nominated for this coming Sunday are also phenomenal films. So we were very happy with the list. It's not like we saw it and we were like, like it was such a competitive, like I would say most of the short, and they were all amazing. So that's another reason I was like, I'm just honored to be around these people. Like this is, you know what I mean? So yeah, it was a really tough year, but I am really happy with the quality of the shorts this year. So if anybody, is out there watching, definitely take a look at them in addition to ours. But to answer your question, I mean, there's not much except just watch the film and share, repost if you like it, and and you're a reviewer, please review, yeah.
yeah. And where can they find your film?
You can find it like on Vimeo. If you're in Canada, you can watch it on Tele-Quebec. They gave us a thing on there. It's also on the Smithsonian through the end of the month, which was like a huge honor. So you can watch that online until March 1st. But otherwise, it'll be on Vimeo. There's a 4-year consideration channel that Vimeo curates, and we're on that. So you can watch it there.
It's awesome. Well, Evelyn, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. I've had such a great chat, and I hope everything I said made sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let us know if we can ever support you in any way. We're always here on the coast, and of course, the state of Georgia is here supporting you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm sorry that I couldn't go to the festival last year. I think most people know at this point, like I've been dealing with so many different health things, and so it's been in and out of the hospital, but we're doing better now. So, do you know where this